Okay, so what's the solution to the climate crisis? Well, it's quite simple. We have to reduce concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's the only thing you can do. And what I'm going to take you through now is the very basics of 11%, because on our wall we have the phrase, cut 11% for an uncompromised future. So if you don't want to have a future which is compromised by collapsing ecosystems, well, there's only one solution to that, and that's to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we have to do that by an average of 11% per year, starting from today. That's an average for the developed countries, like here in Belgium. This is Brussels. So the developed nations of the world have an average to reduce of 11% per year. So what's behind that? Well, as you can see in the PDF, you can download it for free from my website or from the website of the Climate Academy or the Cut 11% website. You can see here what is required by each nation. So you can find your own country. If we take the UK, so I'm from Manchester, and if you go across here, Manchester, or the UK, sorry, has to reduce emissions for 2 degrees to stabilize emissions concentrations at 2 degrees. The UK in 2020 had to reduce by 6.9%, and it would have to do the same next year. So it's December now, by the way. It's kind of unlikely that they reduce by 6.9, so that number is likely to go up. To stabilize temperatures at 1.5 degrees, then the UK would have to reduce its emissions by 28% per year, starting from now. And again, if we haven't done it this year, next year's number will be higher. If we compare that with the USA for 2 degrees has to decrease its emissions by 16% per year for 2 degrees and 77% per year for 1.5. Now, I am, of course, for a reduction down to 1 to stabilize the temperature at 1.5 degrees. Who wouldn't be? In fact, it'd be best at 0, but that would take several hundred years to draw down things. So I am, of course, pro 1.5 degrees, but those who are arguing for 1.5, we have to be clear how possible that is. 77, that means that the USA needs to be carbon neutral in about 18 months' time. You can see some interesting numbers here. Let's take China. This is a selection. Here's China. China needs to reduce by 5.5% per year, starting from now. Now, that might be surprising because China produces 25% roughly of all CO2 emissions, but they do that because they're producing things like this microphone and that screen that are used here in Belgium. So the way in which these figures are calculated is that they're calculated, first of all, on per capita, per person, and China, of course, has over 1 billion people, so that makes a lot. And they're also calculated based on consumption, because that's where the responsibility for the product ultimately lies. You can notice at the bottom, some countries could even increase their emissions. Chad here could increase its emissions by 2.8%, and that would still be compatible with 1.5 degrees. So one of the things that you can explore with the Writing on the Wall project is the inequality here in emissions. Because, of course, those in red, in dark red, like the USA, Sweden, UK, we also have very large historic emissions. So we're responsible for all that's up there in the first place, most of the stuff that's up there in the first place. Okay, now, you mustn't take, I'm a philosophy teacher, so you mustn't take my word for it. These numbers come from the Homo Sapien Foundation, which is run by Michael Wadley and Birgit van Munster, an expert IPCC reviewer. And all of their scientific work has been checked by the world's leading climate scientists. We have a short video which we'll play in a second from Professor Kevin Anderson. He's a world authority on the carbon budget. And he's going to explain, or he's going to endorse the veracity, the quality of the scientific work which is behind this. And thank you, Kevin. And here's Deborah from the Climate Academy, who explained her understanding of the data to Kevin during. We're very grateful. We spent half a day with him asking questions, making sure we understood everything properly. So these numbers are rock solid science. If I just summarize it one more time, there is a carbon budget that is remaining for us to stay at 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. If you divide that budget into per capita, and you allocate that per capita into the nations, like this, then you get these figures. There's just two important things to note, and the first I've already mentioned, and that is that these figures are based on consumption, not on production or on territorial emissions. And the second thing is that they don't include negative emissions. Now, negative emissions happen all the time because there's trees outside and they suck out CO2. So they pull down, in a negative way, they pull down CO2. But the world is very busy developing technology to amplify that through machinery, through technology. Now, when you go on the BBC or many tracker websites, carbon tracker budget websites, or statistics, even the United Nations itself, those statistics are very optimistic about the technology which we will acquire in the future. And for principles of fairness and transparency, we don't think that those things should be included in the figures. I mean, it'd be great if it turns up, but you can't base the current our current action plans on stuff that doesn't exist yet, and it's far away from existing. It's not even close. The kind of negative emissions which are assumed in those budgets, again by the UN and other major media things, that's why it's important that we had Kevin Anderson, Professor Kevin Anderson, to establish that very clearly, that these are very reliable numbers for where we are now. So we are still on a pathway to between 3 and 4 degrees, and if you hear in the news that we're closer to 2 degrees, then you should check where do they get their data from, because that data is almost certainly filled with negative emissions assumptions which are surely unjustified. So the writing on the wall is all about putting out there the clear truth that we have to reduce greenhouse gases based on scientific evidence. We have to have targets that are rooted in scientific reality in order to meet the Paris Agreement. So our number, our average, our symbolic number, 11%, what does it represent? Well, it embodies all the scientific knowledge and social issues of climate change into a simple number for each nation. When you paint that wall in your school, you're basically saying, this is the reality. This is the signal which shows us that the future is going to be very, very difficult. And these are the things that we have to do to avoid that. This should provoke realistic systems thinking, not trivial, local, tiny projects. Schools and education have to provide our older students doing baccalaureates, going to university, becoming consumers and voters. They need to know exactly where we're up to as a whole with system thinking. And this is all what has been agreed in the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement said that they wanted to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere at a level which is not dangerous. Now, if you want to do that, you should be looking at the science. The EU's commitment to the climate crisis recently increased, but that target is not rooted in the carbon budget. It's just rooted in what the nations of the EU thought was politically possible. We don't have an index we don't have a reliable measure for what we're doing. So